Hey y'all, Big Tim here. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Old School and Bass with Big Tim. Today we're going to talk about another one of my favorite lures, the almighty jig. If I'm fishing a lake somewhere, you will almost always see that I have a jig tied on and it's on top of my deck on my boat. I love a jig. They're a big fish lure. They're basically designed to look like crayfish. There's lots of different colors that you can do. Colors on your trailers, colors of your skirt. But for the most part, I like to keep them looking like crayfish. So most of the time I've got some sort of variation of green pumpkin skirt and some sort of green pumpkin trailer. That being said, black and blue is also another very effective color, particularly if the water's pretty dirty. Probably black and blue is probably the most popular color because most of the water that we have around the country, you know, like Louisiana, the Mississippi rivers, things like that, is dirty water. So black and blue is probably the most color jig to use. But I fish a lot of clear water like Lake Cumberland and whatnot, Dale Hollow, some of those places. So that's generally clear water. I'll stay with green pumpkin, maybe even watermelon. So these jigs I actually make myself. Don't worry, I'm not here to sell you any jigs. Not my job. Well, it kind of is my job, but I'm not here to sell you my jigs. I make them just for me. Basically because it's a lot more cost effective since I lose so many jigs throughout the year than to pay $4 or $5 for a jig. I can just make them myself. Here's an example of what they look like. This is generally what I carry around with me. Okay, this is an Arky style head right here. You can kind of see that head. It's got a nice little barb for keeping the skirt on. And then down here is for holding the soft plastic trailer on. And nice thin weed guard. I make basically two different models. That's my everyday jig, my everyday hook. This one is a little bit more beefy hook. Get them even there. You can see the different wire diameter of the hook. This one I use any place that I'm really in some heavy cover. Okay. As far as we talked about the skirt colors, I also paint my heads. Either this one's a watermelon. I also paint it green pumpkin. This is copper and black for black and blue. That's the only four colors I generally use. I've got 4 or 5 other different colors that I keep down at where I make my jigs, but pretty much gotten to the point where it's just those 4 colors is all I use. That's pretty much what I use the most. This is another jig that I make because I lose so many. This is a football head jig. I know a lot of guys will say, well, we like a different hook on there. That's fine. This is the hook I prefer. Why do I prefer it? Basically because it's the same hook that I put in here. But some guys will say, well, you lose a lot of fish. I really don't lose fish on a football head jig. Generally, I set the hook on them and reel like crazy and get them in. This is a Mustad 327.98. If anybody, thinks about making jigs. I like the 60-degree line tie. I don't know if it's a wire tie. Because basically as you're pulling it along the bottom, it's going to keep that hook kind of riding up like that. So as you see, I generally keep them in my box, as I say, naked. Because what I do is I carry another box of skirts that I can make them on the fly. Now granted, after I've made them on the fly, I don't take the skirts off. They'll stay in the box. So as far as trailers go, we talked about the Zoom chunk. This is the Pocket chunk. The Zoom chunk is going to be better anytime the water's cold. We used to use the old-fashioned pork frogs for that, but that's not existent anymore. The Uncle Josh company, I guess, stopped making them about 5 years ago, I think. 6 years ago, something like that. And somebody said that some other company was going to start making pork frogs again, but I haven't seen any. So pork trailers, pork frogs, whatever, they're kind of thing of the past. So if you hear somebody talk jig and pig, they're old school, old fashioned. Pretty much anymore, it's going to be jig and plastic is what you're going to find. So different trailers, not pork, but talked about the net bait pocket crawl, pocket chunk, the zoom chunk, zoom ultra vibe speed crawl, the reaction innovation sweet beaver and smallie beaver. There's all different kinds of things that you can think of for your trailers. I mean, the options are endless, and you can put all different kinds of tails on there, all different kinds of plastics, and still be successful. But the bottom line is, for most intents and purposes, you want it to make it look like a crawdad, crayfish, whatever. I generally like to thread mine up and make it more bite-sized. Sometimes if the fish are real active, I'll kind of nose hook them. But for the most part, I like them real compact. Same with the football head. Usually real compact. A couple other jigs that we have on our arsenal that we use occasionally are finesse jigs. There's a couple different types. I think this is I'm not exactly sure if this is a Cumberland Pro or not, but you see it has a couple of these little wire weed guards. Really, really nice. Come through a lot of cover. It's got a nice little bait keeper on there. Nice solid hook. This one here is from Greenfish Tackle. I guess we ought to talk about why it's a finesse jig. You can see it doesn't have as much skirting. The skirt's been trimmed around the top of the head. That makes it a finesse jig. It generally has a thinner weed guard. So, talking about a thinner weed guard, how about a double weed guard? This is a copy of the Medlock jig made famous in Lake Okeechobee about 2006 or so. Well, maybe a little later, 2010. Brandon Medlock and his dad were making these jigs like this in Florida. I think Lake Placid, somewhere down in Florida. They were making these jigs and winning a lot of tournaments because they were able to put this jig in some really serious cover. And if you've ever been to Florida, you've always got the reeds, cattails, alligator grass. There's all kinds of different things down there. This jig will come through there. Now, like I said, this one's a knockoff. This is not the original Medlock. I bought this basically because it had a trocar hook on it. But takes a, this is basically meant for braid. You got to set the hook really good to get that weed guard down. But these are nice jigs if you're ever thinking about fishing in some really heavy cover. Think about a Medlock or something similar. Another jig that was made famous by Tommy Biffle, I guess about 2007, 8, something like that. He called it the Biffle Hardhead. We call him the wobble head. You can see that is independent. Well, it's not independent, but it swings, swing head jig. You can put any plastic on there that you want, and it'll have almost full range of motion. This will help eliminate losing fish a lot of times, but you can put this in some really, really bad places. And you just kind of, your bait, your plastic is allowed to swing and have a lot of action to it. These come in handy if you're doing any offshore fishing. There's a couple different varieties. I think this one's a Chompers. This one's the original Biffle head. This one here is from a company, and I think they're still out of Indiana, but they're called the Accent Lure Company. You can see you can add a skirt on that one, which is pretty cool. So you can add a skirt and your plastic and still have free range. So another jig that we have available that I use is a swim jig. So with swim jigs, you'll generally see that they're a little bit more pointed to come through cover a little better. They have a thinner weed guard. And this one, this is a Strike King. I don't mind using Strike Kings because they're less expensive. I don't make these because I don't lose a swim jig very often because they're not designed to be on the bottom. You're actually reeling them. This has that nice little deal to hold your bait on. So I really like these jigs. And they're not that expensive. There's all kinds of different swim jigs out on the market. I'm showing you these just because basically I think they're generally some of the cheapest ones that you can find. Okay, this is another one. This one's made to look like a bluegill. And so with its trailer, I have a sungill Kitech. I think that's a 3.8. Really designed to look like a bluegill. And that's the way it's going to look coming through the water. There's all kinds of jig trailers that you can think about for a swim jig. There's the Kitechs, which the Kitech is kind of cool because the tail just moves. But Reaction Innovations has the Skinny Dipper. The Skinny Dipper, not only will the tail move, but it'll make your bait rock back and forth. Which, anytime you've got multiple motion going on, you know, you got a tail wagging and the bait rocking back and forth, that's a big deal. There's all different kinds of things that you can use for a swim jig trailer. I've used the Ultravibe speed crawls for noise, the Zoom horny toad, all different kinds of things. But swim jig is definitely something that you need to consider. Anytime everybody around you is throwing spinner baits and buzz baits and they're not getting bit, maybe you should try a swim jig. We actually had a tournament down at Barren River Lake long time ago. Everybody around us was throwing spinner baits and buzz baits and really not catching any fish. My partner and I, it was a lot different. We were throwing swim jigs. We had it paired with the Ultravibe speed crawl. We had a black jig, black and blue jig with a white speed crawl. We didn't want all white. It was too much white. But that pairing really worked out well, and we wrecked them that day. We had a great, great day. So swim jig's definitely something to consider. These are another type of swim jig. The bladed swim jig, or bladed jig, or chatterbait. This is the original chatterbait. These came out, and I guess about 2005, maybe a little earlier. I remember the first time I heard about them was in 2006 at the Bassmaster Classic. I ran into Peter Taveros, and he had a bag of them. I mean, a brown bag full of them. And I thought, I better find out about these. So, I don't catch many fish on the Ohio River on these. There are people that do. But for myself, I don't. But anytime I've gone away to one of the Southern Divisionals from the Bass Nation, a swim chatterbait has been a big player for me. There's the one time I went to Okeechobee, I had 2 6-pounders the same day on, might have even been this chatterbait here, because I only had white and I tried to take a Sharpie and paint it black. I didn't have any black ones and couldn't find any black ones, so Sharpie was my friend that day. But this is what they were looking like. This is one dressed. This is a black and blue. You'll see it's dressed with a Ultravibe speed crawl. I think this combination right here was a pretty good fish catcher for me at Eufaula. I didn't do well in the tournament, but I caught a lot of fish. But you can dress those. You know, like I said, this is the Ultravibe speed crawl. You can put a swim bait on there. There's all different kinds of things that you can put on there as a trailer. This is probably, and I really don't want to show you this one, not from the fact that I want to keep it secret, just because I don't want you to think that I'm endorsing these high dollar baits, because I do have a couple. This is the Jackhammer. It is a joint venture between Evergreen and the Z-Man company, who makes the original chatterbait. It's a nice bait. It's got a really good hook to it. It's also got a nice little bait keeper up there. I believe that's a tungsten head. That's why it's smaller and why it costs so much. But these things cost anywhere from $15 to $25, whereas the original chatterbait, $4.99. Okay. So don't get me wrong. You can catch the 2 6-pounders I had were on the original chatterbait for $4.99. There's a lot of different kinds of chatterbaits out there that have different hooks. The one that I showed you here that was naked, granted it's old and beat up and the hook's kind of rusty, but the hooks on them aren't bad. And for $4.99, it's a good lure. So you don't have to have the $25 ones, even though I do. If you've got the money, by all means, give them a whirl. But if you don't have money, give the old originals. The old originals, they come with a skirt. This one's just stripped down to show you what they look like. So that's about it for jigs. If you have any questions, give me a comment down at the bottom. I know I didn't cover every possible jig that's out there. There's just way too many. This is kind of what I use around here, and what colors. But if you have any other questions, like I said, write them down below. Please share this with your friends. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about different things here in the future. Hopefully, today is what, June 4th or something like that. And I think it's like 15 degrees outside in northern Kentucky. And golly, I hope the weather breaks soon. My old bones just can't handle getting out in that cold. So hopefully we can get out there and get you some actual fishing video soon. Show some of this stuff in action. But until then, we'll see you next time, and good fishing.